Yo, welcome back YouTube to another Epic 7 how to play video, and in this one we'll be talking about one of the most overpowered characters in recent anime history, and that is Rimuru Tempest. As with all of these Epic 7 how to play guides, I'll be going super in depth and covering a lot about the character, including their stats, their skills, some possible endgame equipment builds for you to use, as well as some suggestions on how to use them effectively in World Arena. So, with the introduction out of the way, let us get into Rimuru's stats. Rimuru Tempest is an Earth Warrior of the Libra zodiac symbol, which means he shares a stat line with Luna, Lilibet, Holiday Euphine, and Little Queen Charlotte. Taking a closer look at his actual stats, he has 1,119 attack, 6,266 health, 109 speed, 627 defense, 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, and no effectiveness or effect resistance. Like we talked about in the Luna video, this is an overall very balanced stat pool. Rimuru is not lacking in any stat category, but because of the overall general balanced stat pool, you will never really hit the highest highs. But that's okay because this is perfect for a character like Rimuru, who's meant to be an all-rounder. He is good on not only offense, but defense, and offers your team quite a bit of support to boot. As a fun fact before moving on to the skills section, Rimuru is voiced by Miho Okasaki, who is a relative newcomer to the voice acting industry. Her first major role is actually that of Rimuru Tempest. Her other roles basically include a lot of background characters in most anime, as well as a couple of characters in various different gacha games. Rimuru's S1 is okay, shall I get started? It is a 1.1x attack multiplier and grants Rimuru a random buff for one turn. The random buffs that you can receive include immunity, increased attack, increased critical hit resistance, and increased effect resistance. Personally, I feel like increased attack and increased critical hit resistance are the two most valuable, as they either give Rimuru an offensive boost or a bit of survivability. Immunity and effect resistance are a bit more situational, but I still think they're pretty good because this is a character that cares about having a lot of buffs on his team. So any buff is a welcome buff in my opinion, and then obviously this is going to be a pretty good S1 as it has an above average multiplier on it. Rimuru's S2 passive is his signature skill, Analyze and Assess. When Rimuru attacks an enemy that has one or more buffs with a non-basic skill, so basically not his S1, he will copy up to 2 random buffs on the target and grant them to all allies. If an enemy has one or more buffs and attacks an ally, Rimuru will counter with Be Ready. Be Ready can only be activated once every 3 turns. Be Ready is a counter attack skill with a 1.65x multiplier and increases Rimuru's combat readiness by a whopping 30%. It's also important to note that Be Ready is a non-basic skill, so it will trigger the copy portion of this passive. For starters, we have to talk about the copy portion of the passive. In my opinion, it is absolutely nuts. It makes a lot of people play suboptimally most of the time for fear of you abusing their own buffs against them, and that I think is where Rimuru gets most of his power and why he was a top tier pick at the end of the last World Arena season. Next, we have to talk about Be Ready's attack multiplier, which is 1.65x. That is absolutely insane for a counter attack skill, as they usually do the character's basic skill damage, which is usually around 1 to 1.2x. 1.65x is basically a character's S3 damage. It's also hilarious because the move is essentially the weakest looking attack I've ever seen, as it looks like it doesn't really have any attack power behind it, but for some reason it still hits really hard. I've watched squishy characters die completely to this thing in one hit. Lastly, we gotta again talk about that whopping 30% combat readiness that you get on this move. It is absolutely huge. If you've played Politis since the How to Play Politis video, you know how impactful that is. Rimuru is almost always going to be taking at least the second or third turn in any given game, because the person going first usually has a very high chance to have a buff on them because of how people build characters. And if Rimuru is not going second, it's probably because the person who went first is giving the person who went second a buff, which means that he will for sure go third. And that is crazy because if he steals a large amount of buffs and is the second or third person to go, he will absolutely destroy you with the S3 skill, which we'll talk about now. Rimuru's S3 is Devour It Black Flame. You acquire 3 souls upon use, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. It has an amazing 1.8x single target attack multiplier. In addition to the base damage of this move, it will also deal 5,000 true damage to the target, plus an extra 625 true damage for each buff on Rimuru's team, up to a maximum of 10,000 true damage. What this means is that if Rimuru's team has 8 or more buffs on it, you will deal the maximum amount possible for this move. If that was not enough, if you target this move on a character that has 1 or more buffs, you will defense break the entire enemy team for 2 turns. So that's really, really strong. Lastly, it is unaffected by elemental disadvantage. This is because if Devour Black Flame is not a successful attack, which means if it actually misses the target, you don't get the true damage buff. So I guess they felt he kind of needed it versus fire units, because when a green unit attacks a red unit, there's a 50% chance to miss. So I guess they just made it so that he doesn't have the miss chance against red characters. So pretty awesome to have. I don't know if it was really needed, but yeah, they gave it to him anyway. So with 8 buffs on this move, it is possible for you to do somewhere between 17 and 20,000 damage to a single target on Rimuru's very first turn, which makes him amazing at assassinating targets at the start of the fight. On top of all that, the true damage activates at the end of the turn. Think of things like Detonate or Reingar's special drain. This means that you can ignore passives on characters like Tempest or the upcoming Spirit Eye Celine. So if you're still having issues with characters like that, Rimuru is a hard counter to them, so please keep that in mind. Additionally, you have to remember that Black Flame is a non-basic skill. What this means is that you can use it to copy buffs in tandem with the S2 passive Analyze and Assess. What I'm trying to tell you basically is that Crimson Armin's invincibility isn't her buffs, it is our buffs, comrades. Lastly, we have to talk about the Soul Burn on Rimuru, which is 10 souls and reduces the cooldown of Devour Black Flame by 2 turns. Because yes, your defense breaking for 2-turn move on the entire enemy team that can one-shot a character and give your team all the buffs in the world really needed to be better and more spammable and all those wonderful things. So what I'm trying to say is it's a really powerful Soul Burn. For Molagora priorities, you want to max the S3 Devour Black Flame first, because it is the strongest move in the kit and it will trigger the S2 passive multiple times throughout a fight. As long as you can lower the cooldown, that should be a-okay for most players who are just trying to use Rimuru as a utility character. Obviously, you want to over-invest in it if you are trying to play Rimuru as either a hybrid or damage-dealing character. After that, I would probably look into maxing the S2 Analyze and Assess, because it has a ridiculous multiplier on it. You might skip it if you're only interested in playing Rimuru for the utility that the S2 provides, as well as the true damage on the S3. And then finally, we max the S1 OK Shall I Get Started Last, because all it really gives is damage, and the multiplier isn't as good as S2. I think the minimum you can get away with on this character is +5 if you're not trying to build him as a damage dealer. For most people, you can do +5 also in the S2, so 10 total. And then for people who really want to use this character as a damage dealer, obviously go +15. Rimuru's passive Analyze and Assess provides a ridiculous amount of team utility. On top of that, he can pack a hell of a punch thanks to his S3, Devour Black Flame. He just works so well in so many situations. He can function as a single target nuker for cleave players, or as a budget Blood Moon haste for those of you who are struggling against Maid Chloe. His versatility is why he is currently a top tier hero, and in my opinion a must pull unit. It is the main reason why I felt I needed to make this video before his banner went away. Normally, I don't make videos for characters that are too new, as I just don't want to give you guys incorrect or incomplete information, but I feel like, again, this character is simply too important. For such a new hero with a ton of different uses, it'd literally be impossible, though, for me to give you all the long-term builds like I just said. As such, I've decided to show you 3 builds that I've seen used against me on my climb through Emperor. These are builds that I've seen used by not only other Emperor players, but Legend players that I've come across as well. Hopefully you will find at least one of them useful to you. And the first one I'm going to show you is the one that is the most common one, and is the one that I personally play, which is a standard Bruiser Rimuru. For a well-rounded, or I should say an all-rounder bruiser build on Rimuru, we want to be on speed immunity so that he can't be disabled at the start of the fight, and it also provides him an extra buff for Devour at Black Flame. You can play Revenge Set, and honestly, Revenge Set might actually be optimal, and I'll talk about that in the speed section because I feel like speed tuning is a really big issue with Rimuru. You don't want him to be too slow, and you don't want him to be too fast, because if he's too slow, he's not going to be able to do the job of assassinating a character with Black Flame. And if he's too fast, you just don't have any buffs to steal. So that's why. Penetration set can work here if you want to, as well as critical hit set if you do not have immunity. I feel like if you're going penetration set, though, you probably want to be playing the second build that we talk about, which is more of an aggressive build that I have seen played against me. For desired stats, we want 2,900 attack, 1,200 defense so that we have good bulk, 15k HP, again, good bulk. We're trying to be a little bit of everything, a little bit of a damage dealer, a little bit of a tank, 200 speed. Like I was just saying with speed and revenge set, the sets overall, I feel like you want him to be in that like 180 to 215 range, because if he's too slow, he's not going to be able to use Black Flame. If he is too fast, they won't have any buffs that are worth stealing, and you're going to be like, man, I really wish I had waited to get those 8 buffs and feel like I could use my Black Flame on the first turn and actually get value out of it, because if they just don't have any buffs to copy, Black Flame just isn't really worth sending off for the most part, so you're just going to end up S1ing, and then they might be able to kill Rimuru before he actually gets it off. He gets his second turn. So then we also want 100% critical hit chance so that we can maximize the damage on S1 and S3. Again, 250 critical hit damage so that our S3 does decent damage, so it's not like hitting like a noodle. If you're playing on one of the builds we'll talk about in a little bit, which is the more tanky build, that's usually hitting for like 12 to 13k on Black Flame. I wanted the 250 critical hit damage and guarantee the crit hit chance, that way my Black Flame is hitting for between 17 and 20k consistently. Taking a look at the right side, I want a critical hit damage necklace, attack percentage ring, and speed boots. For the artifact, I'm playing Warhorn because it synergizes well with this well-rounded character for the most part. I like the fact that it provides attack buff to the rest of my team with the like extra attack percentage on it. It also lets me cycle my turns really quickly on Rimuru, so I can get Be Ready back up more often. I can get Black Flame up more often. And if for some reason they didn't have buffs, they just didn't buff themselves at the start of a fight, I can zip back around faster, and hopefully my Rimuru won't have gotten picked off by that. I can zip around faster when they finally now have buffs and can actually use Black Flame and finish them off. So I really like Warhorn. I think it synergizes incredibly well with the character. You can also play for other artifacts. You can play Draco Plate. You can also play Proof of Valor. They're both basically going to be on here for the same exact reason. It is because it provides damage reduction to Rimuru. Draco Plate obviously gives you the critical hit damage, so it's a bit more damage oriented. And then Proof of Valor is if you just want more damage reduction. I don't have it listed here, but again, Proof of Valor is very good. And then lastly, you can play Anti-Magic Mask. I don't think it is a bad artifact by any means. I have seen it used by a couple of players who do have, I would say, a high level one, because it did proc fairly often. But I feel like more people are playing it on Apocalypse Robbie than they are on Rimuru lately. But I do think this is a viable option, especially if you're going to be a little bit higher on the speed thresholds. Even if you're on like Revenge, you kind of want to cycle a little bit faster. If you're on the higher edge of where I think you should be on speed, like 215, then I do think it is a possible choice. Taking a look at the per piece average, you want 13% or more HP, 14% critical hit chance, and then as you can see, the rest of his stats are kind of low demand for the what's left over, and I leave it to you to kind of just pick and choose to make sure that the stat line works. The second build to talk about is for those of you that want to play a much more aggressive and attack-oriented Rimuru. If you're like a cleave player and you want to use him, this is one that I've seen a couple of legend players use on their streams. I do think it is very powerful. It does not suit my playstyle, but it might be right for you. For the sets, we are using a very Little Queen Charlotte-esque setup where we are on 2 immunity, 2 crit, and 2 penetration as the primary sets. We're really leaning into that penetration, but also trying to get that immunity so that we have those extra buffs for Black Flame. Looking at the desired stats, we want 3,000 attack minimum or higher. Since this is the aggressive build, if you have extra attack and you want to go higher, this is the build to do it on. 1,200 defense and 13k HP are the stat lines that I've seen for most of these aggressive players. I've seen ones as high as 15k HP. They have a very similar stat line to the last one. And if you can get that without sacrificing offense, by all means. But If you want to drop these, as always, if you want to lower the defense, lower the health, just to bump up the damage as much as possible on your Rimuru, you're more than welcome to do it. I think this is the build to do it on. 180 speed or better. Again, you're not on speed set, you're going to be a lot slower. And that's one of the reasons why I don't really like this build as much. But when we get to the artifacts, you'll see we're still on Warhorn, so maybe that alleviates it a little bit. 100% critical hit chance, and then 280 or better critical hit damage. Taking a look at the right side, again, nothing has changed here. Crit damage neck, attack percentage ring, and speed boots. Artifacts are exactly the same ones as before, although I don't think you'd want to play Proof of Valor on this one. Either Warhorn or Draco Plate feel like the clear winners to me, at least on this build, because you're trying to do as much damage as possible. Warhorn makes your team do more damage. It will let your Rimuru take more turns. Draco Plate makes him hit harder. So I think these are the two clear winners. Anti-Magic Mask might be good. Again, I'm not really sure because I do not have one that is super leveled up, but I do think it might be possible to be used on here. Looking at the per piece average, 12% critical hit damage, 14% critical hit chance, 11% attack, and then obviously you fill in the last spot with whatever you need, like speed or things like that, as you can see. It's a much more DPS-oriented average piece. The last build to talk about is a tanky Rimuru that is there just to provide his team with utility. I have come across this one a lot, and it's very difficult to get off the board. The Black Flame only does like 10 to 12k damage on average on this build, and the S1 hits like a wet noodle, but makes up for it because, again, they're going to be copying a lot of buffs throughout the game, which is, I think, the whole point of the build. Looking at the sets, we are on speed immunity, although, again, you can play revenge immunity. I feel like revenge immunity would work really well on this build, actually. For attack, we want 2000 attack. You can honestly play whatever you want. I've just seen builds like this. I've had guildmates that build this. I've had somewhere between 2000 and 2200, and it worked out fine for them. You can play less if you have less. You can play more if you have more. Defense, 1350 or higher. This is the one stat I was unsure of because I personally have not played this, but in the past, bruisers have 1350 or higher usually as defense, and some of these Rimurus I play against are really bulky. It wouldn't surprise me if they have 1500, 1600 defense on them. So whatever you can get that's higher than 1350, I think is a-okay. 20k health. I've seen a lot of Rimurus in the low 20ks. I've seen 20k, 21k, like 20.5k. So somewhere in that range for health is pretty good. 230 speed. These are usually faster because they've sacrificed all their damage stats. As you can see, there is no critical hit damage, no critical hit chance. This build, I think, doesn't really care as much as the previous ones, whether or not they steal buffs early and often, because they're going to be there for most of the game. They're going to be very difficult to get off the board, so they're there for the long haul. They will copy a lot of buffs as opposed to the other two builds, which will usually only last maybe 2 to 3 turn cycles at most. This one will probably last the entire match. Taking a look at the right side, we want to be on either an HP percentage or defense percentage necklace and an HP percentage or defense percentage ring. I have chosen to go double HP necks and rings because I think it is what most people have. I don't really feel like a lot of players have defense percentage rings, so for my calculations, I'm using those. Speed boots, artifact, again, is Warhorn because it cycles a lot of turns, synergizes super well with the character's utility. And for the other possible artifact, I went with the Magic Mask because this build is significantly faster and will last significantly longer, so you can just use it to get more buffs on the character. Most of them probably won't be super useful because you don't have the crit chance or the crit damage, but again, it's just personal choice. If you want more buffs, you got it. I mean, you do have the speed to leverage it, so I leave it to you. There might be a possible build where this might have like 85 crit chance, no crit damage, and can actually exploit it or use it super well here. Looking at the per piece average, we want 13% or higher defense, 7% or higher HP, 10 or more speed per piece, and then some amount of attack percentage or other stats if you're looking for. For how versatile Rimuru is, you can basically infer that he's good with almost everyone in the cast. That's basically true. You can first pick him in a lot of scenarios with a lot of different team comps, and you'll do just fine. So I don't really feel like I have to elaborate too much on teammates, but if there are a couple that I really want to hit on, it's these three, and that's Crimson Armin, Maid Chloe, and Diane. And the reason why is all of these characters provide some level of safety and mitigation for Rimuru, either in the form of being an Arius holder with a damage mitigation share, or they give you like a crit resist, or they give you the re-raise buff. So they all protect this character. They all have ways of mitigating debuffs on the character, whether that's through immunity or through their various cleanses. But the one thing that all these characters have in common is they all can give 2 buffs to Rimuru, which means that if you have a full party, when these characters use their S3 skill, you will have 8 buffs, which means that you will get max damage out of the S3 Black Flame. I've had the most success with these 3 characters in particular when playing this character. Since Rimuru is all about buffs, as you can tell, he's really good against anyone that generates some amount of degenerate debuffs, which just happens to be the meta. So if you see your opponent pick a character like Maid Chloe, you can copy that re-raise buff. Crimson Armin, we can copy those immunity and invincibility buffs. Let's say your opponent's playing something like Remnant Violet, you can copy that dodge buff. If your opponent is playing a team that has a lot of really good buffs, Rimuru is probably a really good matchup. And as we've talked about throughout this video, Black Flame does a lot of damage, somewhere between 17 and 20k on some of these damage builds. So if you are playing a more damage-oriented Rimuru, he is amazing against most characters in the game that have between that 15k to 20k health pool. You can just one-shot them if you pair them with good teammates like we talked about in the teammate section, that Crimson Armin, that Maid Chloe, that Diane. Those characters give a lot of buffs. And there are others out there. You don't need a character that just guarantees gives you 8 buffs. You can use something that gives 4. If you can generate 8 buffs very quickly on Rimuru's team, then he's an amazing matchup against most squishy characters in the game. For damage dealing options that are good against Rimuru, I really don't think you want to be picking him into characters such as Landy or Milam, which is obviously a pretty awesome flavor win. For Landy, she punishes you way too much for having too many buffs. If you do not have a way to get around the Guiding Light stealth, you will get punished and take way too many full bursts to the face and will probably wipe your team. So yes, even though Rimuru might be able to eventually kill Landy with full burst, the rest of your team will most likely be in shambles. So I think you really want to avoid that matchup if you can. Milam obviously is usually going to be built faster than Rimuru, and if she is on Hagel's Ancient Book, she can outright kill your Rimuru in one hit using the combination of her S1 into S3 combo before Rimuru has any game impact. At least you will probably get an attack buff out of it for the rest of your team before Rimuru leaves the battlefield, so that's at least some consolation, but I still don't think it is a particularly great matchup in general. Other things to be wary of are things that can remove buffs from your team, and especially the ones that can remove it and leave your team with unbuffable. Think of things like Basar, Briar Witch Asteria, and then a character like Fairy Tail Tenebria. Yes, she is a blue character, and you do have the 50% chance to dodge on Rimuru, but it doesn't really matter if the rest of your team has no buffs and they are stuck with unbuffable. There's no point in cloning buffs if only Rimuru can have it in the long run. And that is going to do it for the how to play on Rimuru. He is again a very new character, so I probably missed something, and if I did, please let me know down in the comments below. There should be a playlist on your screen now to watch more how to play videos for Epic 7 that I have done in the past. And until next time, guys, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a good one now.